This is eastern Ukraine. Conflict broke out here in 2014, and it hasn't ended. There are about 100,000 fighters stationed here, which makes it one of the most heavily militarized areas on Earth. There are Ukrainian forces to the west and Russia-backed separatist militias to the east. Fighting between the two groups occurs here, along the contact line. In 2015, after nearly a year of deadly fighting, a peace agreement called for a ceasefire, creating this security zone. The agreement was supposed to stop the fighting and resolve the conflict between Ukraine and the separatists. But 3 years later, the security zone remains the most violent place in Ukraine. The ceasefire is violated almost every single day in East Ukraine, which reportedly puts about 100,000 civilians in constant danger. Over 10,000 people have died since the conflict in Ukraine began, and about 1.5 million have been displaced, while both sides continue to build up their forces. The conflict began at the end of 2013, when the Ukrainian government rejected an association with the European Union in order to build stronger ties with Russia. The pro-Moscow move led to massive protests in the capital, Kiev, which turned deadly by 2014. Russia took advantage of the chaos and sent its military in to annex Crimea in March. A month later, pro-Russian separatists in the Donbass seized the cities of Luhansk and Donetsk and declared them independent from Ukraine. The Ukrainian army moved to take the region back, but Russia covertly joined the separatist rebels, which led to fierce fighting for several months. In February 2015, both sides settled on a peace agreement called Minsk II. The deal laid down conditions for a ceasefire in the security zone, where heavy artillery, tanks, and mortars were banned. Foreign militaries, meaning Russia, had to leave Ukraine. It also recognized the two separatist areas, the Donetsk People's Republic and the Luhansk People's Republic, and outlined how they could be reincorporated back into Ukraine. But despite the agreement, none of that has happened. In order to understand why, you have to know what Ukraine means to Russia's President Vladimir Putin.
Last one out of the Soviet Union, please turn out the light. The vitally important Ukraine announced
independence for the Republic.
The people there are more Russian than Ukrainian.
Much to fear. Separate Ukraine would be a catastrophe.
Ukraine was part of the Russian Empire in the 19th century and the Soviet Union in the 20th. When the Soviet Union dissolved in 1991, its western territory broke into independent states, including Ukraine. They formed a buffer between Russia and Western Europe. But in the 90s and 2000s, these countries started drifting westward, and many joined the EU. By invading Ukraine, Putin was able to destabilize and stop it from developing a stronger relationship with Western Europe. Russia continues to fuel the fighting by supporting the separatists and keeps its own military at the ready. Meanwhile, Ukraine's government is forced to devote resources to its defense. Both sides have ignored the ceasefire so far, and a closer look at the front lines reveals just how unstable the region is. The separatist rebels in the LPR and DPR have funding, weapons, and the assurance of the massive Russian military behind them. They are responsible for the majority of the ceasefire violations. On the Ukrainian side, the forces are a mix of Ukrainian army soldiers and volunteer militias. These militias are funded by Ukrainian oligarchs and members of parliament. Some have far-right views and even have attacked the Kiev government. But Kiev continues to fund and arm these groups anyway. It's their only defense against the Russia-backed rebels in the east. So despite a ceasefire that could have ended the conflict, there's an active war on the ground. Both sides continue to fire heavy artillery on a daily basis as a show of strength. Power, water, and supplies are common targets, and the heaviest price is paid by the hundreds of thousands of civilians trapped in the crossfire.